question evolution. I think that anyone who has seen the range of speakers tonight, completing with me, will have their doubts about evolution. However, I cannot begin to emphasize to you how little taste I have for Sarah Jaffe. That woman, I tell you, when I was a young reporter, I went out to the farm fields of Ohio, and I covered the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, organizing Mexican-American farm workers, and I thought it was a pretty hot, young, committed labor reporter. And I like to tell myself for a while, Sarah Jaffe, she's following in my footsteps. She's doing it like I did it. But the truth of the matter is, Sarah Jaffe has already done it so much better than I did it. She is my hero. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Jaffe. Just go row by row and talk about all the wonderful people who are here, so many of the friends, comrades, allies from along the way. But I would be remiss in saying that I also have no taste for Allison Kilkenny. Because, at the Nation website, we pride ourselves on speed and efficiency. And, I like to think I've got those working class stories down, that I'm on top of things, and I'm thinking things through. I go to the website, and there Allison's already written the story better than I would have done. Allison Kilkenny. Now, Jeremy Scahill, this is how pathetic. I still think of Jeremy Scahill as a young reporter. No, I remember this kid coming. I was on a panel with him at the University of Wisconsin once, and he came in, and I think he was literally like an intern still on Democracy Now! And he came in and spoke with more passion and more vibrance and more energy about independent journalism from the center of it, from the heart of it, than anything Bob and I were doing at that time. And I want to tell you, people sometimes are very nice to Bob and I about the work that we have done. The work that we have done over the years has been framed and shaped by the experience of knowing people like Jeremy Scahill and Amy Goodman. And what a fairness and accuracy in reporting. Well, let me say this. I believe that a reporting that allows poverty in the midst of plenty, a reporting that allows war when peace is possible, and a reporting that allows our government to be bought and sold by billionaires is not journalism. That is stenography to power. And fairness and accuracy in reporting, these are the pioneers of calling out stenography to power in America. An incredible organization. Now, row two. I'm honored to be at Judson tonight, and I want to begin by saying that I think it is important to recognize the vital role that religious communities, that churches in our urban areas and often in our small towns, play in questioning the rush to war when no other institution does. And this particular institution, for year after year, generation after generation, has been in the forefront of saying this country ought not solve its problems by dropping bombs on other people. We ought to try diplomacy. And as we celebrate a victory for that principle, I celebrate Judson Memorial Church, and I am honored to be here. Here on the Judson community, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used to cherish a phrase, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. And we adore that phrase because it seems organic. It seems to suggest that no matter what happens, no matter what the progression of humanity, ultimately we will get to a better place. But in researching King's work, especially with A. Philip Randolph, the great socialist organizer, the great union organizer who called the March on Washington in 1963, I will remind you that one of their favorite phrases was from Frederick Douglass: power concedes nothing without a demand. The arc of history does bend toward justice, but it bends toward justice because progressive Americans demand that it do so. The people who are gathered here tonight, you who come out on a Monday night in New York City when you could be doing so many other things, understand the vital role that you have played in bending the arc of history toward justice. Thank you to each and every one of you. Look, I understand fully. I truly understand why we should be depressed. I know there are so many reasons to be bummed out. I can go through the list. But I will just tell you this. A week that starts with us not going to war in Syria and it ends with Larry Summers dropping out of the competition. But I am also reminded of my friend Steve Earle, who said in his great song, one of his great songs, he said, "I dreamed last night that I reached the promised land, and I encountered St. Pete. And he said, Steve, come on in. And I looked at him and I said, Pete, I ain't ever satisfied. And I am not satisfied with a week that keeps us out of the war and keeps Larry Summers out of the Federal Reserve. I want a year, a decade, a generation, a future in which we don't have any more unnecessary and wrong-headed wars, and we don't have any more unnecessary and wrong-headed economics in this country. So how do we get there? What do we do? How do we take a moment? How do we take a moment in which we ought to celebrate? And Amy had it exactly right. Amy said it exactly right. It wasn't Vladimir Putin. And it wasn't Congress. It was the American people not wanting a war that caused us to not have a war. And you understand, I cover Congress for a living. I talked to these members of Congress. And I knew we weren't going to do this thing before a lot of other people did because all the members were so scared. And I tried to figure out what had happened. Why didn't it go the way? And Amy pointed out some very good points here tonight. But let me offer you another point. Back before the war in Iraq, Dick Cheney. I'll tell you a story before I was going to write a biography of Dick Cheney. I went to my friend Andrew Schiffer. He's a wonderful, Andrew Schiffer, he's a wonderful publisher, created the New Press, one of the most brilliant thinkers, one of the greatest publishers of our time. And I said, I'm going to write a book about Dick Cheney. And I said, I want my title to be He Really Is a Dick. And Andre, sort of very sophisticated European, said, that's a little bit gauche, a little bit much. Perhaps you could just call it Dick. Everyone will get it. But Andre Schiffer, wisdom there, I did call it Dick, and it did okay. Dick Cheney, in August of 2002, went to a Veteran of Foreign Wars event, and he started talking about how we had to do things to Iraq. Started going on and on. And he got in trouble. Dick Cheney rarely got in trouble in the Bush-Cheney White House. But he got in trouble because Andrew Card said, you don't try out new material in August. You don't, roll out a war in separate even the worst members of Congress from the money and media election complex, when you break that Borg connection and you take them out to America for a month and the subject of a war comes up, people approach them in coffee shops, people approach them in church basements, people approach them in union halls, and they say, I don't want this war. Bernie Sanders said that there was a desperate desire on the part of the pro-war folks to get Congress back in session. Get them back to Washington. Get them away from the people. Because that's what we've degenerated to in America. You cannot trust the political class. You cannot trust the media. Thomas Jefferson was right. We rested all power in the people because the people alone will defend their republic from those who would warp and undermine and destroy its basic principles. The people saved us from a war, and the people ought not be satisfied. If we can stop a war, why can't we amend the Constitution to say money is not speech, corporations are not people, and the citizens of this republic have a right to amend their Constitution to get money out of our politics? If we can stop Larry Summers from becoming the head of the Federal Reserve, why can't we amend the Constitution of the United States to say that never again will the Supreme Court of this country meddle with our voting rights? Why don't we amend the Constitution to say we have a right to vote and a right to have our votes counted, no matter where we live, south, north, east, west, all Americans, all races. You have a right to vote and you have a right to have it counted. If our votes are going to count, brothers and sisters, if our votes are going to count, why in heaven's name do we have an electoral college that gets to cancel them out? George Bush wasn't elected in 2000. George Bush lost the election by 540,000 votes, but he became president of the United States because of an archaic structural flaw in our system. Let us amend the Constitution to end the electoral college. Let us make a commitment in this republic to make real the promise of the American experiment. James Madison, a flawed man by any measure, and yet had the wisdom to say that an American experiment in which the people did not have access to information and the ability to debate it, a free press, the right to assemble, the right to petition for the redress of grievances, if we did not have a functional free press, that it was a prelude to tragedy or farce or both. Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, tragedy, farce. The fact of the matter is, we have reached the point that Madison feared. So let us understand that when we talk about reform, it's not just to get money out of politics. It's not just to have the right to vote established. It's not to get rid of the structural flaws. It is to recognize finally that we need a free and independent press in this country, sufficiently funded by the people themselves so that it will speak truth to power and take the power away from the elites and give it back to the great masses. Let us have a true press.
Here.
I know what you're saying, why, Mr. Nichols? What a pleasure to be with you on this Monday night in New York City. We're so glad that you've come out. Many of us are friends, colleagues, comrades. What a pleasure to join us. And we enjoy your optimism. How pleasant of you to speak of constitutional amendments. How pleasant of you to speak of a functional media system in America. What a delight it is to have this notion that perhaps this could be a lovely and good country with economic and social justice, peace. What a fun idea that is. I'm so troubled by how unrealistic you are. I'm unsettled by your idealism in the face of the obvious failure of everything we've ever tried. I enjoy your optimism, but I'll have to walk out here in a little bit, and I'll be back in the room. And I know it's so easy to be cynical. I truly understand the power and the delight of cynicism. There's few pleasures greater than saying that this moment is the darkest of all moments and only getting a little bit worse with each day. And yet the truth of the matter is, we did just stop a war to prevent Larry Summers from being headed. And so the fact of the matter is, we may not be quite as powerless as we'd like to tell ourselves. And the other truth of the matter is that history does not allow us to be pessimists. History does not permit pessimism. Because in this very city, just blocks from here, 100 years ago, if you walked out on the streets of New York, you could walk into a mill. Maybe you'd have to go out to Patterson, New Jersey to find it. But you could go into a mill, and you could find 6, 7, 8-year-old girls running up and down amid the working machines, changing the bobbins on those machines. Bobbin girls, they were called. These were girls that didn't go to school. They worked in the mill, and their job was to keep the machines running, even at the expense of their own safety and health. They wanted the little girls to do it because their fingers were small. They could get into the tiny places within the machine where you could put a new bobbin on, even as the machine was running. But sometimes a little girl would stumble. Sometimes she would put her finger in too far, and she would lose a digit. She would lose a hand. But that was okay.
Yeah.
Because she was a little girl. She was expendable.
Exactly.
100 years ago in America, if that little girl made it to young adulthood, she would get a job on the 10th or the 11th or the 12th floor of a building in New York City. She'd be working in a textile factory. And when the fire started in the factory, she and her co-workers, Italians and Jews, immigrants, would run to the doors trying to open them, and they would find they had been locked so that the women would not take bathroom breaks that would interrupt the production of those textile products, of those shirtwaists. And so those poor women, they went to the windows and jumped to their death. Not in Bangladesh, not in some sweatshop hellhole we'd never seen, but a few blocks from this building. And those women, if they survived that fire, they could not vote to change their circumstances because women were denied the franchise. And if by chance they had gotten the franchise, they could not elect a Congress that would serve them because the United States Senate was appointed by legislatures in circumstances where billionaires bought their seats. Millionaires bought their seats in a gilded age where all power redounded to those with wealth. We had an appointed, not an elected Senate. And if by some chance you could choose a Senate that would serve those little girls and would serve those women, that Senate did not have the power to tax corporations or the wealthy in any kind of meaningful way because we didn't have an Internal Revenue Service. We didn't have a functional tax system. That was 1910 in America. 10 years later, just 10 years later, we had child labor laws. We had protections for women in the workplace. Women had the right to vote. The Senate was elected, not appointed. And we had established a tax system that allowed for progressive taxation of corporations and the wealthy. In a 10-year period, from 1910 to 1920, we fundamentally transformed this country and cleared the way for a new deal, a fair deal, a square deal. We made it possible for all the reforms that would come after because we took power away from the elites that would put that little girl next to that machine, that would put those young women on the 11th floor of a building where they could not get on in circumstance of fire, and we gave power to them. In a 10-year period, we transformed this country. And we did so because we recognized a fundamental reality. If the circumstance is sufficiently dire, we do not tinker around the edges of the crisis. We go to the heart of the matter. Women got the right to vote because we amended the Constitution. The Senate became elected because we amended the of Martin Luther King Jr., the demand of Harriet Tubman, whose words are on the front of this building, the demand of the people that if the system does not serve them, we will replace that system with a constitution that serves democracy, not dollarocracy. A constitution that says the people have power. This is a radical concept. Absolutely. It is absolutely as radical as the concept in 1791, when after the people of this country rejected the initial draft of the Constitution and said it is insufficient, the very founders of this republic were forced to go back and add 10 amendments to that Constitution to guarantee the rights of the people. Amending the Constitution is a radical act. It is a radically American act, and it is a radically necessary act today. We must amend the Constitution to get money out of politics. It is as simple as that. We must amend the Constitution to protect the right to vote. It is as simple as that. We must make fundamental reforms in this republic, and we must commit ourselves to a broad age of reform moment in which we no longer tinker around the edges, but make the fundamental changes. Sarah mentioned in her very generous introduction that Patti Smith wrote the introduction, or wrote an introduction to our book, Armenia Not Theirs, a long time ago. Patti Smith is somebody I've known for a good while. She wanders the streets. And Patti Smith went and lived in Michigan for a while. And I interviewed her once and I said, well, what was it like living in Michigan? She said, I didn't live in New York, I lived as a citizen. And not that New Yorkers aren't citizens, but she said, when I lived in New York, I was a celebrity, I was a star. When I lived in Michigan, I had to do laundry and go and, when our basement flooded, I had to find some kind of shop vac thing that cleared the water out. I lived as a citizen. It was hard, and it was complicated. And sometimes I got very, very frustrated by that. And one day, she said she was sitting at a table, and her husband, Fred Smith, came in, and he said, he looked at her, she was maybe down a little bit that day, and Fred Smith said, Patty, people have power, right? And she wrote that wonderful song, People Have the Power. The power to dream, to rule, to wrestle the world from fools. It is decreed. The people rule. People have the power. Let's not just make it a song, brothers and sisters. Let us make it a principle to fundamentally reform this republic and to say, it is decreed. The people rule. It is decreed. No more tinkering around the edges. No more small demands. No more timid supplications. We know the crisis. Let us address it. Solidarity.
So much. Let's do it again.